Good evening. It's a pleasure to see this many people here, so thank you all for coming this evening. As you will note at the title of this meeting, the community is highly concerned about potential freight impacts and other issues related to the proposed Amtrak Hiawatha project. If you look around at the size of the audience tonight, it is clear that this is one of the largest challenges Glenview has faced in the last decade. We actually waited a few extra minutes just to be sure that people could continue to sign the petitions and continue to file in. We have a very full agenda with a lot of information, so let me quickly acknowledge the support of our federal and state legislators, along with the governor's office and Cook County. Several of them were able to arrange their busy schedules to attend tonight, including, momentarily, we expect Congressman Jan Schakowsky. Congressman Brad Schneider will be joining us shortly as well. From State Senator Daniel Biss's office, we have Josh Browdy. Sitting right up here, we have Representative Laura Fine. We also have Cook County Commissioner Greg Goslin here in the office, in the audience. And if you would please, I would ask that you give them a round of applause for their support in being here. We have a six-part agenda this evening. First, my welcome, then followed by a rail overview. Here is, good evening, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky. Followed by a project update, some community concerns, some closing remarks, and a legislator response. While we don't have time to hear directly from each of you during this meeting this evening, you are well represented by several community speakers tonight. They were chosen because they represent a cohort of more than 50 people each. They will discuss a wide variety of concerns that we have heard over the past year. Please refer to your agenda for their names and affiliations. Our goals tonight are to update you on the project, hear your concerns, and strengthen our resolve to mitigate the negative impacts of this potential Amtrak project on our community. To start the agenda, I would like to introduce Ms. Libby Ogard, who works for Prime Focus LLC. She is a rail transportation expert who has been working with Glenview, as well as Lake Forest, by extension, to help us understand how and why this project is being proposed. Specifically, she has helped us identify a key issue in resolving this and future rail challenges. That is, to separate freight and passenger traffic on different tracks. Please welcome Ms. Libby Ogard. Libby? Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure to join you today, and I'm just going to take a few minutes to try to give you a background of the rail freight transportation network and how it interfaces with passenger rail. Railroads made their debut in North America in the early 1800s. This map basically shows that there are about 610 freight railroads in North America, which operate approximately 140,000 miles in the United States. By comparison, our national highway system is comprised of about 164,000 miles. Illinois is home to 46 railroads which operate approximately 7,000 miles within the state. 4,000 of those miles are operated within the city of Chicago. Railroads are great partners. They pay their taxes, they own, operate, maintain, and build their freight networks. In 2015, they collectively invested about $65 billion to keep freight moving throughout North America. They reinvest about 40 cents of every revenue dollar on their freight network and operating network. Essentially, they improve our global competitiveness. They have been actively improving their business models since deregulation in the early 80s and have been quickly adopting to new technologies, which is allowing them to reduce their costs and keep North American exports more competitive. Railroads reduce congestion by taking trucks off the road and are fuel efficient and sustainable operators. 1 ton of freight moves more than 400 miles with 1 gallon of fuel. So what is Chicago's problem? Historically, due to all the rail connections, you can see that many of the rail networks all met in Chicago because Chicago was the hub of the North American network. 6 of the 7 Class I railroads interchange in Chicago. On average, it takes between 26 and 30 hours to get across Chicago by rail. Ironically, in the 1990s, railroad partnerships between Conrail and the Santa Fe operated a container stack train from LA to North Bergen, New Jersey in a simple number of 76 hours for 1 freight train. So those kinds of efficiencies can be gained if we could reduce congestion. Congestion leads to increased costs for the carrier. It leads to increased labor costs, to reduce asset utilization, and lost productivity. It is essential that this delay in crosstown transportation is reduced. It is estimated that about $325 million of extra inventory is needed to maintain the in-transit value of the products that are moving through Chicago. Recently, a sulfur train took 27 hours to cross through Chicago, which averaged about 1.1 miles an hour, which is about a quarter of the speed of a modern electric wheelchair. So what's the problem? One of the biggest problems is the fact that Amtrak and Metra both share Class I railroad, as well as a growing freight network. Freight tonnage is expected to double by 2045. Passenger rail is growing faster than gross domestic product, GDP, and is growing faster by about 2/3 than vehicle miles traveled. And that growth is probably expected to continue, particularly as the baby boomers age and more people are taking rail, particularly for long trips. One of the biggest issues that we also run into is complex multi-jurisdictional authorities. And what this means is that when we have one carrier operating the signals and another carrier operating on the track, we have to carefully coordinate and stage those movements out of respect for safety and to be sure that signalization and authorities are respected. So why are holding tracks wrong? Freight train lengths are increasing due to something that was recently adopted called distributed power. And what that basically means is it's allowing the railroads to move more cars in one train by putting a locomotive in the middle of that train. Our neighbors to the west were very concerned about railroad carriers running through their neighborhoods and decided to videotape and measure the trains that are operating through their jurisdiction. And what they're noticing is nobody's running 10,000-foot trains. They're all growing 12,000 feet and longer. This really helps the railroads achieve better productivity. It helps them leverage limited crews, and it gives them better profitability when they can run long trains. The other thing that we run into is that freight trains are long and slow, and passenger trains are short and fast. And when you're trying to operate a jackrabbit next to a plow horse, sharing that same right-of-way, it's very difficult to coordinate those movements. And so we lose capacity if we don't separate it. So one of the big solutions here is look at velocity and keep in mind that velocity is key. It's unlikely that we are going to be able to build our way out of congestion on the North American rail network. So the key is velocity in moving the freight that does move through the network faster. So we increase throughput. So what are some of the possible long-term solutions? And I think the question that we all have to ask, I'm pretty familiar with the EA in the fact that there were a number of alternatives and several of the alternatives were dismissed. The alternative that we show here on alternative 5 in the picture on your left basically shows 30 miles of double track that would allow us to separate passenger and rail. It would accommodate the fast sprint passenger trains and the slower, heavier rail trains, and it would give us a tremendous amount of capacity. Yet that was dismissed because the Hiawatha EA at that time was only looking at 10 round trips. If you would go back to why they dismissed it, is they indicated that if passenger travel grows, or if they had to look at 17 round trips, that it was something that probably should be relooked at. Davis Junction is another opportunity that's circled in the center map, and basically what that would show is that CP would take a detour from Portage, Wisconsin, drop southbound to Davis Junction, and then move into the Bensonville corridor from the west. And a third option, which has been proposed, it's still sort of a notion in somebody's eye at this point, is a freight bypass or an outer loop. And with that, I will turn it over. Good job.
Thank you very much, Libby. So I'm going to quickly provide an overview of the process and then conclude with some of the details associated with this proposed project. Start off first with a little bit of a rail history. So through thoughtful planning, Glenview has grown up around the rail. We have 2 metro stations, so one is at the downtown Glenview station, and then one is at the North Glenview station at the Glen. We also have our downtown station serving the Amtrak Hiawatha service, plus an additional long traveling Empire Building service with Amtrak. Glenview's even been recognized as one of the top transit suburbs within the Chicagoland area, primarily because the whole area has grown up, especially downtown Glenview, around the transit stop. You see there the old picture of the first train station, the newer train station, and as we saw back in the 50s and 60s, the civic heart of the village of Glenview is its downtown, and it continues to be today. You see that in all of the parades and all the activities that are occurring in the downtown. All of that happened through thoughtful planning of the rail networks and building around that transit hub. I want to provide a little bit of an overview of what's being proposed. First, we'll start currently with what's out there along the Metra Amtrak line. It's also shared by Canadian Pacific. And from the stats there, you can see there's 2 different Amtrak lines, so that's ultimately 12 trips a day that occur. There's 61 different Metra trips that happen along the Metra North Milwaukee line. And then there's 27 different trips that are done by the Canadian Pacific, which is the freight rail line. All of this is from along the railroad tracks. Again, this is the Hiawatha project from Chicago's Union Station up to Milwaukee. So what is this Amtrak Hiawatha proposal? It's a proposed $195 million project, and the proposal is to include an additional service along the Hiawatha line. That's going to increase the trips from 14 trips currently, which is 7 round trips, to 20 trips in a day. What does that mean with respect to the trips? Well, all of the new 6 trips, they're all happening outside of the main rush hour time frames, so that's when any demand is at its lowest along the Hiawatha line. You can see on the left-hand side of the screen, you have 925 express trains, so that one does not stop in the village of Glenview. The 7:07 p.m. and then the 10:52 p.m. train stops in Glenview. Those are on the outbound trips. And then in the morning, in the inbound from Milwaukee, you have an 8:26 a.m. train, a 2:57 p.m. train, and a 11:43 p.m. train. So those are the 6 trips that would occur as part of this proposal. Who are the stakeholders that are benefiting from this project? With this project, you have 3 different components. There's the freight rail component, that's Canadian Pacific and Union Pacific. You have the passenger rail, that's the Hiawatha Amtrak line. And then you also have Metra, the commuter rail line. And then the stakeholders as far as the transportation agencies that are overseeing this project. It's primarily a federal project, so therefore the Federal Railroad Administration is overseeing it. with support and overview by not only the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, but also IDOT, the Illinois Department of Transportation. And ultimately, as part of this proposal, any costs that are not covered by the federal government are split from Wisconsin and Illinois, with Wisconsin picking up 75% of the share and Illinois picking up 25%. Now going to go on to a few slides that highlight the process that this project is going through. Well, this chart on the right-hand side doesn't really completely explain the complicated process that is the NEPA process, which is the National Environmental Policy Act, which is the way that the federal government goes through and does the review of any new project that requires federal funding. If there is a proposal, the proposal gets analyzed from not only what is proposed with the main improvements, but also with any type of alternatives that might exist. So both of those gets reviewed with respect to the environmental impacts of both the main proposal and any alternatives. And there is a public process as part of this. And where you see the box, you go through the NEPA process, and right now we're in the red box area, which is doing a review of an environmental assessment. And that environmental assessment is occurring primarily because all of the proposed project is being included within the right-of-way that is currently owned by the railroads. And as part of this project, and as part of the evaluation, if the environmental impacts are not mitigated, they need to go through a more detailed review of the environmental impacts, which is called an environmental impact statement. And through that environmental impact statement, all of the details related to the impacts and the specific project components are reviewed with a fine-tooth comb. And throughout this entire project, what has been asked by the Village of Glenview is to go through this EIS proposal, because we are not seeing the data that is necessary to completely evaluate the freight side of the impacts that are happening as part of this Amtrak passenger line proposal. One more thing on this. As part of this process, what occurs is that if the project does not get kicked into the environmental statement area, the EIS, what happens is there's a judgment by the Federal Railway Administration, and that judgment is called a finding of no significant impact. And once that occurs, then this project would be eligible for federal funding. All right, moving on to the EA specifically. With the EA, what is proposed as part of this process is a whole binder worth of documents. And all of those documents were provided for the purpose of identifying and addressing existing and future passenger demand for Amtrak's Hiawatha service. So we've been going through all of those details and trying to understand exactly what those impacts are. Just as a little bit of a recap of what's happened to date, in October of 2016, that EA was released. There was a public meeting process that occurred that was hosted by WSDOT and IDOT on November 2nd in 2016. The Village of Glenview and other communities, plus the residents, all submitted detailed information with our concerns. And as part of that, the WSDOT and IDOT team are trying to incorporate some of those issues into the release of a revised EA document, which is anticipated in 2018. As part of the pressure that the residents and the communities have been putting on this process to make sure that it's transparent and there's a lot of public input, there has been confirmation that there will be a second public meeting that would occur following the release of that revised EA. We're not sure the timeline of that, but it's likely to occur in the April and May timeframe. And currently on the website for this project, it's showing that the project is scheduled to be reviewed and approved in the summertime. So again, we're trying to effectuate change with respect to the issues that are out there. What has Glenview been doing with respect to this proposal? We continue to object to the proposal. Not only did the Village Board of Trustees pass a resolution objecting to it, there's been 2 opportunities where staff and the village has submitted huge documents that list many and numerous objections to what is being proposed and presenting numerous alternatives to what is being proposed. Those occurred in the 2016 and the beginning of 2017. We're waiting for the additional information to see what other concerns that are out there and how they're being mitigated. Again, with the goal of, we don't believe this is necessary, we don't believe that this is needed, and that this should be removed from the project. A little bit of orientation on the project now with the next couple slides, and then We'll be moving on to the residents and their comments. A little bit of perspective. It's quite a complicated scenario. Again, you saw that this is the Amtrak Metra and CP line. This is going from Milwaukee down to Union Station. But there's a lot of issues that are occurring along these tracks. Some of the tracks are owned by CP, some of them are owned by Metra. Then you also have the tracks that are in the area by Costco that head out to the west towards West Park. Those are tracks that are owned by the UP. As part of this Hiawatha proposal, there are 2 siding tracks that are included that have been noted. One is in Lake Forest, it's a 3-mile holding track. And then you have the 2-mile holding track that is proposed in Glenview. And the holding track, which is a differentiating feature on this, is that this is not located on the main line, which is Metra and Amtrak. This is located on the Union Pacific line. And the issues that they're having and the reasons that they're going about for these concerns is that as the CP trains are traveling along the Metra tracks, they need to get onto the UP tracks and go through many different intersections to get to south of O'Hare, which is the CP Bensonville Yard. And I'll go through a little bit later some of the details related to the Glenview siding track. The Lake Forest holding track, as I mentioned, is a 3-mile holding track. It's basically slightly north of the Lake Forest Metro Station, which is just by Conway Road, and extends all the way up until Route 176. And there's a map that shows where that holding track is being proposed. It's in the red line that you see there. With respect to the impacts of Hiawatha on Glenview, there's 2 different things that are occurring as part of this proposal. There's a 2-mile holding track, as I mentioned. That's number 1. Again, that's on the UP rail line for the CP trains that are traveling along it. And number 2, there's a proposed universal crossover switches, 2 of them that are located south of Dew Street, which is south of the downtown area. Focusing first on the freight holding track, the primary issue that is being dealt with the freight holding track is that you have Canadian Pacific trains that are traveling back and forth from Milwaukee and further parts north and west to the Bensonville Yard. And what occurs in that situation is that they have to get off of the main tracks, which is the Amtrak and Metra tracks, and they need to blend into the Union Pacific tracks, which is where that red area is, the proposed holding track. Currently what occurs is that as those trains, those Canadian Pacific trains, are moving on to the Union Pacific trains, they need to get clearance from Union Pacific. Union Pacific controls that junction. They're going to have priorities to Union Pacific trains, and they don't want to send a Canadian Pacific train on their line until the line is clear all the way from this junction point to the Bensonville Yard. So as a Canadian Pacific train currently holds and it blocks the Amtrak and Metra tracks, which is one of the concerns that has been mentioned. And then vice versa, a Canadian Pacific train going north, they are holding on the Union Pacific tracks, and Union Pacific tracks want those cleared. They have to hold that Canadian Pacific train until there's opportunities to blend onto the Amtrak and Metra line. And so therefore that impedes what happens with how CP operates that train line. And so therefore this is the reason that they're saying that there's a proposed freight holding track, that it has to mitigate the impacts that are happening with the Amtrak trains that are traveling during off-peak times in these areas. Wanted to focus on some of the areas and the residential impacts that you see. The 2 red lines, as part of the EA documents, there hasn't been a clear decision on whether the proposed holding track is on the east or west side of the tracks. And as you can see here, it runs right through the Willows neighborhood, Glen Lake Estates, Regency at the Glen, also the Navy housing, Westgate at the Glen, and further north from this picture is Princeton Village. There's no clarity on which side it would go, but as you can see, there's 2 tracks, and you would need a 3rd track either on the east or west side of those tracks to have a holding track. And you can see the impacts directly on these adjacent neighbors as part of that proposal. Some details related to it. There would be 2 new single-track bridges that would be needed to be built. One of those would be at Shermer, so again, is that delays on Shermer to close that while they're doing any sort of bridge work. In addition, you can see from the upper picture, that's generally the area where you'd have to have a new rail bed. And to have the new rail bed there, you need to have a 20-foot retaining wall to support the new rail bed. All of the landscaping that is providing a buffer between those residential areas would be gone, and it would be replaced with a 20-foot retaining wall and that rail bed. So you'd have At grade, 20 feet for rail bed, and a wall. 20 feet after that is the height of a train that would be passing by. And as that train goes further towards the south, as it's going to the crossing at Westlake Avenue, the lower picture is just from Jennings Park. That shows a 7-foot difference between at grade and where the rail bed is. That fence is generally the right-of-way, so all that landscaping would be removed. There would be a retaining wall and rail bed and trains visible in all of those areas, belching and smoking the things that come along with a holding track. What is the issues and impacts and the solutions that are out there for this holding track? There's significantly increased congestion that would be occurring on Westlake Avenue as the trains are slowing down to go into the holding track and then slowly exiting the holding track. It would be blocking traffic and blocking the main destinations to the hospital and to the high school that are linked by Westlake Avenue. As you'll hear later on tonight, the unacceptable health, safety, environmental, and property value impacts. And we know that there's viable alternatives out there, and ultimately with those viable alternatives, this holding track should be removed from the EA. Additionally, we're not focusing on separating that freight and rail and passenger rail issues that we talked about before. For the downtown area, there's a new proposed switch just south of Dew Street. Again, in a residential area, you see the listings of the homes that are on both sides. This proposed switch would allow trains to get from one track to the other track and vice versa. This would allow for maintenance of the tracks. It would also allow, if there was an issue with one of the trains and it was stopped on the tracks, for trains to bypass that area. And again, there are impacts with these proposed switches, and we also have solutions for those switches. The trains, anytime you're going over a switch, it creates a lot of noise. Again, that's in a residential area. Also, we already have issues with the Amtrak trains. They're quite long, and they stop a lot longer than a typical Metro train stops. An Amtrak train can stop up to 4 minutes at a station, and that means the gates are down at both Glenview Road and Dews, backing up traffic. Again, you're going to hear more of those concerns from the residents. And there are opportunities to do something different with this proposal as well. Move the switches north to the industrial areas, and also there's an opportunity to move the Amtrak stop to the North Glenview station. And then finally, who are the project stakeholders that are being impacted? You see a list of all the neighboring communities that are happening up and down this rail line, as well as all of the neighborhoods and destinations that are throughout Glenview. And finally, before we get to the residents and you're able to listen to their concerns, wanted to show you a quick video here so you can hear and see the impacts.
Standing at the Glenview station, looking at the Amtrak train from Chicago Union Station to Milwaukee. There's very few people getting on the train. There is a lot of empty seats.
Woke up to this train parked at about 7 o'clock. It's now about 8:30, and it's just taken off. No idea what time it stopped. The third train in a half an hour, double stacked and parked. Yep. Here comes the second train now. That one had 5 engines.
Now it's time to hear from the residents. I'd like to introduce Dave Rahia from the Glenview Action Committee.
Good evening. My name is Dave Rahia. I've been a Glenview resident for 8 years. My wife, Andrea, and I are raising 2 boys, Jack and Ryan, in the Flick Park neighborhood. In addition, I've been working at Glenbrook Hospital right next door here for the past 9 years. And I have the honor of chairing the Glenview Action Committee. Action stands for Alliance to Control Train Impact on Our Neighborhoods. We're a group of Glenview residents concerned about the impact of this project on our community. As you see this auditorium, look around, we have a very vibrant and engaged community. It's a great place to live, work, and raise a family. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the Village of Glenview, the staff, for their great partnership with us residents to fight this project and the potential detrimental impacts on our community. I also want to thank the state and federal elected officials for being here this evening to understand this issue from our community's point of view. We're counting on you to represent us. Glenview Action Committee, and I would assume most Glenview residents, are not against rail. We use Metra, we use Amtrak. However, we are against the potential health, safety, and environmental and congestion impacts of building a freight train holding track right in the middle of our community. So as Jeff outlined, why is this project being proposed? This is a $200 million project to get Amtrak to allow them to run more trains through downtown Glenview. According to the environmental impact, Amtrak is about 2 million seats a year on the Hiawatha track, of which only 800,000 are filled. That's only about 40% at capacity. And Glenview residents don't need an EA to see that. We sit on Glenview Road and watch empty Amtrak cars roll by. So their ridership data does not support spending hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money and incurring all the potential health and safety impacts to our community, especially when there's a reasonable alternative and a much more cost-effective one. They could add 1 or 2 more cars to existing train lines during peak times to meet their demand. The need to spend $200 million and build a freight train parking lot in our community goes away. Also, as an employee of Glenbrook Hospital, I'm worried about the impact of building a holding track will have on our patients. As many of you know, Glenbrook is a busy level 2 trauma center. About 35,000 people access the emergency room every year. Parking, starting, stopping trains at Westlake is going to cause delays for emergency vehicles and community members who need to access the emergency room. They're either going to be stopped there or they have to find a longer route to get to the emergency room. We also have 1,000 employees who come to work at Glenbrook and over 44,000 patient days of patients in beds at Glenbrook. Only 2 blocks from here would be a holding track with patients and healthcare workers breathing in potentially toxic chemicals. As you all know, the community depends on Glenbrook for health and healing, not breathing in additional pollution. So building freight train parking in the middle of our community doesn't make sense fiscally. It does not make sense environmentally. It does not make sense for the health and safety of our community when the need can be met by adding a few cars to an existing train line during peak times. Also doesn't make sense for IDOT and WSDOT to send the EA to the Federal Railroad Administration without ensuring that our communities understand the impact to our communities and have a chance to weigh in. We're counting on our elected officials to protect our great community from any potential harm and explore any reasonable options to this project. Thank you. To represent High School District 225, we have the school board president, Skip Shine. Skip.
Thank you, Dave. I'd like to begin by thanking the village, Mr. Patterson, Mr. Owen, for helping coordinate this activity tonight to bring us all together and try and level set the information and some expectations, because whenever you're confronted with an issue like this, it's important to get the facts. And as I sit here and listen to this presentation, I can already think of 3 or 4 things that I didn't understand that I feel better informed tonight, and I hope your takeaway from this is a higher level of information and a better path forward for all of us. So on behalf of the Board of Education, welcome to the Watson Auditorium. I think it's simple to say that the Glenbrook 225 Board of Education strongly opposes the installation of the new railroad siding. Every day, approximately 6,000 people visit this campus. That is students, faculty, parents, drop-offs, buses, whatever. That is a lot of people. And I've lived here for 27 years. I've sent 4 kids through this school, and I've seen the town grow. When we moved here, there was a Naval Air Station. Traffic was not nearly at the level it is today. And I think all of us who are residents of Glenview are acutely aware of how difficult it is to traverse the town going east to west. And the siding is really going to create a negative impact. The project will negatively impact Glenbrook South's students and faculty primarily by delaying access to the school while creating health and life safety hazards. Trains entering and departing the proposed siding will by necessity travel at a very reduced rate of speed. Trains crossing the grade level crossing at Westlake will block one of only 2 eastbound access roads to GBS. Today, even with both East and Westlake roads available at the start and end of each day, traffic is often backed up from Finkston on the east side of campus all the way back towards Greenwood Road, almost a half a mile away. When a southbound train leaves the proposed siding, it is estimated that the Westlake crossing will remain blocked for 15 to 20 minutes. Well, it's traveling at 1 mile per hour, and it's 10,000 feet long. So just think about going for a walk for 2 miles. You and the train are going at approximately the same speed. With the road and also walking access blocked, the school schedule will be severely impacted. Frankly, we will not be able to start school on time. In addition to student and family access, first responders from the Glenview Police Department, located to the east on Lake Avenue, will be blocked by cars diverted onto East Lake in an attempt to bypass the train crossing at the grade at Westlake. And I would imagine that many of you have experienced this. You're at the corner at Greenwood and Westlake. You see the train. What do? You turn down Greenwood, you go to Westlake, and you try to come around. That does not work in the time periods before and after school. Everything kind of gridlocks. And for first responders, this would create a very, very challenging situation trying to get to our building in case of emergency. And emergency planning is sort of item 1 now for school districts. This is what we think about, talk about, devote resources to, and the last thing we need is to have our first responders have a delay in getting to our school. It is totally unacceptable. In addition to delaying access to and from GBS, the other obvious safety concerns, there are also significant health concerns caused by the extended idling of large diesel locomotives sitting within close proximity to the school and adjoining businesses. Building code requires fresh air to be drawn into all commercial and industrial air systems. The addition of fresh air is used to dilute and recirculate internal air that becomes contaminated simply by people breathing and just routine work processes. The extended idling of the engines at the south end of the siding will generate emissions equivalent to a small diesel power plant. The effluent spewed into the local air by the locomotives will thus be drawn into our facilities and will aggravate typical respiratory conditions, including asthma. If this were a facility being built of the same capacity and the same number of kilowatts with 4 large diesel generators, there would be an entire permitting process. But they are kind of getting away from that by using the EA as kind of, I wouldn't say a smokescreen, but it is a way that the EA is focused on the Hiawatha. The environmental impact, I believe, should be focused on the trains and the freight side of this, because that's where the real impact is to our organization, to the kids and families of Glenbrook. And so it's really critical that we look at this. If the So our neighbors and friends at Signode, if they wanted to build a facility and put in a generating plant like this, and this is would not be an emergency plant. We all think of emergency generators. They come on for a short period of time, they're used, they turn off, they're something we live with. This is something that could sit in idle for hours. Could be 6 to 8 hours of large diesel generators, all that particulate matter coming into the air. I mean, we were worried about little Volkswagens spewing a couple small fumes of diesel. These are huge machines running continuously. And it is not right that they do not have to be accountable for the negatives of the project, only the positives, which are the profit. And I'm not against that, but when you look at these things, you should be required to look at both sides of the ledger, the positives as well as the negatives that impact the community. So my question then is, why is the permitting process for this project does not require a complete and full environmental impact study? How is it that powerful corporate interests can circumvent laws created to protect the public? The school district needs the help and active participation of our state and federal representatives to insist that all laws are followed and that all required studies and evaluations are conducted so that the voices of Glenview are given equal weight to those of powerful corporate interests who stand to profit by construction and use of the proposed rail siding. For the health and welfare of our GBS students, staff, and families, the Glenbrook 225 Board of Education stands with all community groups in strong opposition to the proposed train siding project as currently proposed. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kent Fuller. I spent about 42 years on various boards and commissions here, the Plan Commission, village boards, and such. About 27 of those years, I worked for federal EPA. I'm since retired. I'm speaking for myself, not that agency. Some of those years, I spent supervising a staff who reviewed environmental assessments, actually on grants for municipal sewage collection treatment systems, which don't sound very romantic. They're not. But they spread across 6 states, and in peak years, we were granting more than $1 billion. It was a substantial operation. Those projects had to meet NEPA, and NEPA has been mentioned several times. It's the National Environmental Policy Act that covers virtually all federal agencies that have to comply. Congress, and back in the Nixon administration, they said the federal agencies should examine the environmental impacts of their major decisions. And that's basically what NEPA does. And it does it by calling for the environmental assessment, which has some rules to it. And if they do the examination and they don't find major impacts, then the agency can declare a finding of no significant impact, nicknamed the FONSI. Well, that's where this project is headed. Looking at it, they've done an initial assessment. Now, the pushback was pretty hard, and people said, wait a minute, that assessment's very incomplete. It doesn't really deal with the freight impacts, for example. And we're told that more work has been done on the impact, on the assessment, and that we'll get to see it sometime soon, and that there will be a public meeting. But it's all very advisory and to the federal agencies. Now, if there was a decision to do an environmental impact statement, that kicks it into another gear. And it has to be much more thorough, and it has a much more complete requirement for public involvement and transparency. So one of the things the village has asked for is that there indeed be an environmental impact statement prepared. And I must admit, having signed off on hundreds of EAs myself, I'd have a choke pretty hard before I could sign off on even a pretty complete EA here. It really should be an impact statement. Even if it's judged not to require an impact statement, there should be a very complete vetting and gathering of facts, hard facts, about what's involved here. The core of NEPA is a requirement that you not only do a thorough examination of what's proposed, but that the proposing agency must identify the feasible alternatives, and you must look at the environmental impacts of that. So that you'd be looking at, okay, how about this increasing the loading of this freight line and the holding tracks? What are the alternatives to that? Well, as was mentioned, one of the alternatives, as far as Amtrak is concerned, add a couple cars. You probably don't need to, you solve a lot of the problem right there. If you insist on more freight, and the freight has been building up in volume for a long time. I mean, a lot of people built their houses out there with a couple freights a day, and they were breezing through at 40 or 50 miles an hour. Now they're sitting there for the longest time in the world. And then when they start up, the diesel is loading very heavily, and we all know the dark smoke that comes out of there when the train is starting, and it's moving very slowly. So it's putting a big load of pollution into that neighborhood, but the whole village as well. So what's the alternative? Well, move the freight train somewhere else. You know, find a way further away from the dense urban area, the residential neighborhoods, and get those trains out in a perimeter area. What kinds of impacts are we talking about? Well, we're talking about pollution, we're talking about, you know, wildlife impacts, but we're also talking about human health impacts, and it's that the diesel smoke and emissions and carcinogenic substances, partially burned hydrocarbons, yada, yada, yada. So, are these impacts significant? You know, looking again at the current situation, it really needs a lot more examination. And it should really, if it doesn't actually get done as an environmental impact statement, it should somehow fully accomplish those steps in the impact statement that does a very public review of the principal alternatives and the impacts there. So even if an EIS should be done, if it's not, the full intent of NEPA should be honored here. Well, you've heard about some of the alternatives and things, and you're going to hear some more. I think that's maybe about enough for me. I would submit that the League of Women Voters has provided a very good commentary on this, and here to talk a little bit more about that is Sherry Latash, representing the League of Women Voters. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sherry Latash, and along with Ann Yoshida, we serve as the co-presidents of the League of Women Voters of Glenview and Glencoe. The League of Women Voters may be best known for registering voters and holding candidate forums, but for the past 98 years, the League of Women Voters has been the ongoing voice for responsible and representative government at the local, state, and national levels. Responsible government includes, among other things, ensuring transparency in governmental actions through open meetings, access to information, and a fair process that includes public participation, and the government's duty to respond to citizen concerns. Citizens' right to know and to be heard by elected and appointed officials and civil servants is essential to preserving faith in our democracy. The League also has long-standing public policy positions on a range of natural resource issues, which serve as the basis for our advocacy on issues such as the Hiawatha environmental assessment. As a follow-up to Kent Fuller's comments, in November 2016, the League submitted comments on the environmental assessment. For the following reasons, we disputed their finding that there would be no impact on the quality of the human environment. The consultants doing the environmental assessment did not take any air, soil, or water samples in the vicinity of the existing freight track. Instead, they relied on Cook County air quality data. Nor did they do any real-time noise and vibration monitoring of homes near the existing track. We asserted that since they didn't collect local data reflecting current conditions, there is no basis for extrapolating there won't be an impact from additional freight traffic. Also, the environmental assessment didn't include an inventory of nearby schools, senior citizen housing, or parks, where the most sensitive populations might be exposed to particulates and hazardous constituents in diesel fumes. The environmental assessment didn't discuss unique sources of local air pollution, and how the additive or synergistic impact of exhaust from additional diesel trains might influence air quality. For all these reasons and more, the League asserted that the environmental assessment was inadequate and requested that the more comprehensive environmental impact statement be prepared. Ample research exists on the impacts of noise and air pollution from diesel freight traffic. In the next few weeks, a revised environmental assessment will be released. We will be looking to see whether it addresses the concerns we identified 16 months ago, and we will be persistent in advocating that the public have a reasonable time in which to review and comment on this latest version. And now I'd like to introduce Jim Martin, immediate past president of the Glenview Chamber of Commerce.
Wow, this is a nice turnout. I used to think I was talking to a big group when I was addressing my Chamber of Commerce folks, but this is excellent. Thank you very much for coming out, everybody. I do represent the more than 500 members of the Glenview Chamber of Commerce, and we're all business people. We realize that the railroads are a business and a company, and that they want to maximize profit using their existing assets. That's the road beds we've got now. We get it. But when it means what is going to happen to dividing this village in half with all this traffic, the downtime for gates is about 47 minutes a day, and that's predicted to go to at least an hour and 15 minutes. We have to be able to run businesses by getting goods and customers in and out or through the village. Otherwise, they'll turn around and go elsewhere to eat, go elsewhere to buy things, and there go our tax dollars as well. So placing a crossover switch south of the downtown area, it just doesn't make sense. There's residential areas there, and you heard in the video the noise. The crossover tracks caused that accident in South Carolina maybe a month ago. The switch tender left the switch open after he sidetracked a train, and the through train came by, and the track was still being directed off to the side. He went through there at high speed, and you can see what happened on the right. This is the same thing they want to do out here, and the west side of town and partly in downtown. Both can be moved up north somewhere. They have no residential situations to deal with up from Willow Road north, and that might be a much better place to put everything. Amtrak was supposed to move a station house up to the Glen. When the Glen was built, there's a nice new station up there with an entire half of it dedicated to moving Amtrak ticketing and waiting areas, and they've never moved. I don't know exactly what the reasons. I've heard a couple of different reasons, but none of them seem to make much sense. It's time for them to consider making that move. Railroads talking about serving the communities. They talk about serving our communities, but at this point, things are looking like they're going to go totally upside down. And we in the chamber believe it's time to reconsider that. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Gary Dubofsky from the neighborhood The Willows.
Good evening. Appreciate you all coming out tonight. My name is Gary Dubofsky, and I'm a committee member with the Action Committee in Glenview. I'm also a lifelong Glenview resident, and about 18 years ago, my wife Jody and my 3 kids, we decided to plant our roots permanently in Glenview, and we live in the Willows. For those of you not familiar, the Willows, as shown in the video, is bordered on the east side by the tracks in question, the projects commonly known as the Hiawatha and also the 820. And I'm here to represent the Willows and provide a little bit of personal insight into the freight component, since it's right in my backyard. As referenced, some of the videos and photographs that you saw in the video are my production. Thank you. 18 years ago, we purchased our home. We were well aware that there was a freight line that ran behind our home, and it wasn't going anywhere. But 18 years ago, and a few years after that, we heard the trains, we saw the trains, they came and they went. Now they park. They're longer, they're slower, they're heavier, there's more engines. Most of this has been occurring since 2012 when the bridges collapsed. They put a new bridge in. We have an access bridge that's directly behind our home. And since that time, again, the noises have increased. The frequency with which they park has increased. The amount of coal dust and diesel particulate matter that settles over our properties has increased, and it infiltrates our homes when the windows are open. A study by Sightline Institute and the University of Washington evaluated 367 coal trains over a 2-month period. Over that 2-month period, they determined that each and every coal car loses approximately 645 pounds of coal dust over a 400-mile trip. Some of these trains have in excess of 100 cars, and each car holds approximately 100 to 150 tons of coal, to give you an idea of how much of that dust is traveling over our environment as they move through residential areas. Cited by OSHA, diesel exhaust contains carbon, ash, metallic particles, sulfates, silicates, hydrocarbons. All these compounds are known to cause headaches, dizziness, ear and eye irritations, long-term cardiovascular, pulmonary diseases, and lung cancer. Some of the typical toxic chemicals that we see by rail parked in our backyard contain chlorine gas, molten sulfur, white phosphorus, anhydrous ammonia, and compressed carbon monoxide. Imagine if there's an accident and this stuff leaks in your backyard. As you've seen on the video, we also experience major increases in the amount of vibration that we experience in our home and our neighborhood. It's not just when they pass, but it's also when they start and stop. The percussive sound of a freight train going from a dead stop into slow motion sounds like a repetitive bomb going off. The screeching in the brakes and the compression of the couplers when they come to a halt is deafening. We don't have a straight hanging picture in our home. Items on the countertops dance when long, heavy trains pass. Liquids vibrate in our glassware. Soot builds up on our patio furniture, and we've had a few foundation cracks repaired over the several years. Neighbors that never really heard trains are now more than well aware of the trains passing through our neighborhood because of the increased vibration, sound, noise, size of the trains, and the fact that they park and they take off. According to the Journal of Rail Transportation, all forms of rail traffic have the potential to cause negative environmental effects to both structures and humans, depending on the amount of exposure over time. The freight trains, the rail authorities, will lead you to believe that because the trains have always been here, there's no additional impact. The reality is this is false. There's more trains, there's more cars, there's more locomotives. They're parking the trains now. They're proposing to install additional rails. They're proposing to install additional switches in the middle of our communities, and they've completely glossed over all of these concerns in their preliminary environmental assessment. All in their effort to increase their service, increase their efficiencies, and all at the expense of the safety and the quality of our life in our communities. I appreciate your time. I want to thank the Village of Glenview, who we've been working with very closely for close to 3 years now in battling this project. I also want to thank all of the elected officials that are here tonight and the representatives representing them as well. I know most of them have been, if not all of them, have been on our side and working for us, and we appreciate their continued work. I'd like to introduce Joanne Desmond. She's one of our action committees out of Lake Forest who are going through the same type of holding track proposal in their area. And here's Joanne.
Thank you very much. Before I make my comments, I would like to extend a sincere appreciation to the Village of Glenview for putting on this forum, for inviting the Lake Forest Forum, the Lake Forest Action Committee to participate, and also to my action colleagues here in Glenview that we've worked very closely with. We have a very strong coalition, a very strong alliance to work together to stop at the grassroots level, which would be a project that would be very terrible for all of our communities. The impacts of the proposed Lake Forest holding track are similar to the impacts of Glenview's concerns. If Metra's request is granted, Lake Forest is proposed to get a 3-mile holding track adjacent to neighborhoods, schools, parks, churches, our Middle Fork savanna, and nature preserves, with significant impacts to health, safety, quality of life, and property values. We've talked about the health impacts, air pollution, carcinogenic diesel particles that travel many miles, so they don't just stay over the neighborhoods where the trains are idling or passing. It affects the entire community. In addition, there would be ground pollution from leaky hazmat tank cars, where 90% of these tank cars don't meet the .117 safety requirements of being double-lined and having greater protection. In fact, research has documented physical and mental health impacts from waking at night from excessive noise of freight trains. Stopping, starting, and switching tracks will make that so much worse. The safety concerns that we have. More trains on a busy rail corridor increases the risk of derailment and collision when freight trains traveling at 40 miles per hour are sharing the very same tracks with commuter and passenger trains traveling at 79 miles per hour. Rather than our tax dollars supporting a Hiawatha proposal expansion that calls for holding tracks to increase rail capacity, investing in separating freight traffic from commuter and passenger trains should be a higher priority for safety, as you've heard earlier. Quality of life. This proposal clearly diminishes the quality of life of thousands of residents. People who live in proximity to these tracks are already dealing with a significant increase over the past few years in the volume of freight traffic, as Gary has so aptly described, with double high cars, longer trains, heavier hazmat carrying cargoes. Holding tracks and increasing capacity for more freight trains will only make this much worse. Property value impacts in Lake Forest. We already have expensive homes that have suffered broken windows and fallen brick chimneys from the vibrations of heavy freight trains that now pass so close to many homes. This third rail EA proposal would change the character of our community and yours and worsen an already problematic situation by significantly impacting property values, not just those in proximity to the tracks, but those throughout our communities when we are known to have train yards in our communities. Besides many neighborhoods being impacted, in Lake Forest there are 6 schools within proximity to this proposed 3-mile holding track with approximately 1,300 students, as well as high school athletic fields directly adjacent to where freight trains would be idling, and our young people would be breathing in the known carcinogens that would be experiencing here at your high school. This would create not only the risk of carcinogenic diesel fumes, but other health risks for our children. The third rail in Lake Forest would run directly through the 687-acre Middle Fork savanna that is the highest quality tallgrass savanna of its kind in the nation and recognized as a globally threatened ecosystem. It is also one of the most important sites in the state for biodiversity and a safe harbor for endangered plant and wildlife species and sensitive wetlands. It feeds into the North Branch of the Chicago River. The Middle Fork Savanna is a national ecological research site and outdoor classroom for schools and universities, allergies, and if this EA, and it's not from the fumes yet, and if this EA project were to be approved, it would then also be home to idling freight trains on a third rail, severely threatening this ecosystem and polluting this environment. We also have concerns with first responders accessing during emergencies due to traffic congestion and closed roads. In Lake Forest, there is a fire station directly west of the tracks, and slowing and stopped trains would cause critical delays in first responders' ability to reach many destinations in emergencies. It'll also delay parents and school buses from reaching nearby schools. Thousands of people who live in close proximity to this rail corridor in Deerfield, Bannockburn, and Lake Forest, in addition to your community, would have significant quality of life impacts by additional freight traffic from this proposal. More noise, interrupted sleep, property damage from vibrations, traffic backups, and road closures. And wait, what about derailments? We should not think we are immune from the potential disaster of a derailment or collision causing a dangerous chemical spill or explosion. The Department of Transportation designates evacuation zones as everything within a half mile of the tracks on either side for chemical spills, and everything within a mile on either side of the tracks for explosions. That represents a considerable area of our communities. About 1 year ago, on March 15th, at 2:30 in the morning, a Union Pacific train passing through Lake Forest derailed 11 cars, 10 of them carrying hazmat chemicals. Fortunately, there was no chemical leak or explosion from this incident. The outcome, however, would have been very different if this broken rail, the most common cause of derailments, was on the crowded Metra shared rail corridor where this project is proposed, so close to homes and schools. Also, just last summer, a Canadian National train derailment in Plainfield dumped 45,000 gallons of crude oil in that nearby community. Although there was no loss of life, there was significant damage to the environment, and fortunately, there were no homes nearby. Just imagine if this happened on this rail corridor in our neighborhoods or in our Middle Fork Savannah. It would have had an even more disastrous outcome. So why would our government take that risk so rail profits could increase? Let's separate hazmat freight traffic from passenger and commuter trains that travel so close to neighborhoods and schools, and let's not further risk the health and safety of residents by building train yards in our community. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so Lake Forest blew it. I was supposed to introduce to my two colleagues here, Chuck Walling and Sally Stevenson sorry, from HOA in Princeton Village. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to everybody who came out tonight. This is a big issue for our community, and this kind of reminds me of anybody who's a parent. And our part will be kind of like the kids, saying, Mommy, Daddy, why is this happening to us? Asking questions. What's the meaning behind this? What's the intention? So we're going to ask some questions that I hope all of you leave with tonight, because to be honest with you, and many of us have been working on this for over a year, probably close to 2 years now, and there hasn't been some real good answers that have come forth. But I do want everybody to ask the question is, what about the future for our families? What about the future for our community? Glenview is the place that saved Wagner Farm. It saved the Grove. It has more open space than any other community in the state of Illinois per population. Why would we want a freight holding track in this community? And why would we want it for what you heard tonight? For what reason? When there's 40% ridership, makes no sense. Why not have some cost-effective measures like adding a couple trains onto peak periods of time? Why not consider all options like moving the freight train holding track out of residential areas? very similar to what happened in South Carolina. If you looked at those pictures where they had that terrible accident in Columbia, it was not in a residential area, it was an area outside of a residential area. Why are they proposing it in Glenview, a densely populated area? And I still don't understand. And I saw the letter that was sent from our village president asking for a freight impact study. And why to this day we have not gotten an answer whether or not this study that will be coming out will be a freight impact study and going to address the impact of freight traffic, not the commuter traffic. So the other question that I have in mind is, what is in it for us? Many of you know that I'm the retired director of the Park District, and I know from working with other governments, you work in the spirit of the people and you work in the spirit of intergovernmental cooperation. Why are there not any reasonable alternatives to this holding track? We made it clear, our team made it clear that nobody's against rail. I think we all are very much in favor of improved rail throughout our area, but it's the holding track that we're asking for get removed for the quality of our life and also for all the residents. There's 6 residential areas that are being impacted. Now, next to me here is Sally. She's my neighbor, and I have to tell you, I twisted her arms to come today because I know if I was to close this on behalf of the residents, I'd get very emotional because I really find it a subject that turns my ears red and really gets me fired up. So I'm going to turn it over to Sally to kind of close out our portion.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I guess my questions are, who is really behind the proposal to add a freight train holding track in the middle of the town of Glenview? Is it really Metra with a poorly justified proposal to add additional Hiawatha service between Chicago and Milwaukee? Or is it actually the freight carriers, and specifically Canadian Pacific and Union Pacific, who would like to maximize the volume of freight, including hazardous material such as ethanol, both staged in and transported through our community? Who is responsible for the increased safety risks associated with this project? If it's the railroads, then I have a huge concern. One only needs to look at the condition of the overpasses at Willow Road and Techney Road to see the obvious disregard for maintenance It is so bad that when traffic is backed up on Willow Road, cars will often refuse to come to a stop under the viaduct, under the overpass. Also, neither Canadian Pacific or Union Pacific have fully installed positive train control systems, PTCs, which originally had a mandated implementation deadline of December 31st, 2015. Nor have they been quick to adopt electronically controlled pneumatic brake systems, which would allow lengthy freight trains to come to a halt more quickly and more safely. And as you can see from the photos that we're showing, I mean, there's definitely concerns about how they would maintain what we already have. As you have seen and heard tonight, something's not right, and we need action before it's too late. What do we citizens expect? Leadership by our legislators, IDOT, WISDOT, and all parties working with our Glenview officials in the spirit of intergovernmental cooperation to find reasonable alternatives to the proposed holding track. It was approximately 5 years ago from this coming summer that 2 of our residents at Princeton Village were killed due to the bridge collapse and the derailment on Shermer Road. This not only killed 2 of our citizens, but it also closed Shermer Road for 2 years. A similar holding track accident, as you've heard tonight, in Columbia, South Carolina, caused fatalities, and that wasn't even in a residential area. We plead on behalf of our residents and community to remove the holding and switching station by seeking other alternatives. Thank you to our legislators and the Village of Glenview for standing up for what is right. Say no to the holding track. We believe the impending proposal to add a freight train holding track will change the face of Glenview forever and have a real impact on our community unless we act now. We plead for some type of alternative. Thank you.
It's now a real honor for me to introduce Carrie Cummings. She's our past village president, and I think most of you know her, have seen her, or heard of her. She's just passionate about our community. Let's give her a warm welcome. Carrie Cummings.
I'll add my thank you for you all being here this evening. It's a real testament to how Glenview operates. We get together when there are problems, we come together to solve them, and we hope that our voices will be heard. Most recently, I had the honor to head up the Comprehensive Plan Committee. That's when all of the residents of Glenview are asked to give their input as to our vision for the next 10 years for Glenview. We developed chapters on economics, development, land use, transportation, and environment. And I can guarantee you, we did not envision Glenview as a parking lot for freight trains. So I think I'll start with the premise, and that's what we've heard all along, is this is about Amtrak. Amtrak has some overcrowding, and they would like to add additional trains. So I think what that boils down to is we're going to spend, as taxpayers, $195 million because some people stand on some trains sometime. And the other part of that is, well, if we build it and add the trains, they will come. And I think that's a folly. I think that in addition to spending that $195 million, now we're also asking the residents of Glenview to have setbacks in their health and safety. It threatens the safety of our school children, the health and safety of our workers and those who visit our hospital, of our neighborhoods, and we have heard on and on how great an impact that will be to the residents of Glenview. There are less expensive alternatives that I believe are being ignored through the statistics that are a lot of sway over nothing, the statistics that are chosen to achieve the desired results. And I think the League of Women Voters has cited some examples of that. So in conclusion, I want to say Glenview should not, cannot be a parking lot for freight trains. Thank you.
I'm Don Owen. I'm the Deputy Village Manager for Glenview, and since we are running out of time, the good news is I'm going from 3 slides to 1 slide. To summarize the Village of Glenview's positions, I'd like to make 6 comments. 1, Glenview opposes this project as proposed. 2, Glenview believes an environmental impact statement is needed. 3, Glenview believes a freight impact study must be completed. 4, Glenview believes the freight holding track will create unacceptable impacts to our communities. 5, Glenview seeks to eliminate the holding track from the project. And 6, Glenview seeks to mitigate the impacts on our downtown. So that completes our formal presentation tonight. What we'd like to do is offer our federal and state legislators an opportunity to address the audience. And I know that Jan Schakowsky would like to start tonight. So Jan, thank you so much for coming tonight, and welcome.
Well, first of all, a huge congratulations to the village. This was such a well-done presentation where every statement was accompanied by incredible slides, and our videographer who showed about his, behind his house. Thank you. It was just amazing, really. And congratulations to all of you. Thank you all for coming. I just want to say, I think Don Owens summed it up. We took a snapshot picture of those things. As your Congresswoman, I want to say that I want to be a partner with you. We have been since the beginning. We've written to the Federal Railroad Commission, and we want to make sure that and we've done that along with Congressman Brad Schneider and with State Representatives Laura Fine and Robin Gable and Senator Daniel Biss. So we're all on the same team. This is a team effort. We want to make sure that all of those things are accomplished. What you've heard tonight is there are alternatives. We do not have to have the kind of dangers and threat to the community that this proposal has made. We want to see an environmental impact statement, not an inadequate environmental assessment. Not working. And so, I mean, I think there's a lot of power in this room, incredible community leaders, the village is on board, all of your legislators on board. With your people power, I cannot see how they can deny us. So the fight goes on. We're proud to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Next, Congressman Schneider.
Good evening. Let me start with thank you. I can see, if you could see what I could see, you could get a sense of how impressive this turnout is. And sitting in the audience, let me tell you how impressive this presentation has been. Actually before the election in 2016 and right after the election, I got a call not from one, but from 5 mayors and village presidents. From Glenview, Northbrook, Deerfield, Bannockburn, and Lake Forest. When 5 communities come together and say we have a concern, there's a very easy decision we have to get activated. And that's what you have done here tonight, and this is extraordinary. I am extraordinarily impressed. What I've heard tonight, let me just share a couple of thoughts. Clearly there's a strong opposition to making, and I'm going to quote the past president, making Glenview a parking lot for trains. That doesn't make sense. What I heard is a desire, and I'll just quote some things, that all laws are followed, that all impacts are considered, and alternatives are evaluated. I think that's a fair request and, in fact, a fair demand. And Jan and I have asked for a full environmental impact statement, and we'll continue to pursue that. What I heard tonight is that over the last 18 years, trains have gotten longer, trains have gotten slower, trains have gotten heavier, which means that the impact is trains are louder, trains are dirtier, more disruptive and more destructive. What I heard tonight is that we are talking about health, we're talking about safety, we're talking about community. And it is absolutely imperative that we work to strengthen our communities, to make our communities better, to make our children's future healthier and more secure. And the proposals that are being presented are taking us in the exact opposite direction. What I heard tonight is that we need to continue to work together as a community and as collectively 5 communities and across the 9th and the 10th congressional districts with our state legislatures to make sure that we do follow all the laws. We do evaluate the full impact, not just the impact of the Hiawatha train, and that we get that environmental impact statement that we need, that we deserve, and we will continue to demand. Thank you.
Next, Representative Laura Fine.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm going to keep this short and sweet because I think it's me and your pajamas, so I'm going to go quickly. I just want to thank the village and our community. I think we need to give everybody here a round of applause. I have to say, this is very personal to me. I'm a longtime Glenview resident. Not only am I an alumna of Glenbrook South, but my 2 boys are alumni of this high school. So this runs deep. And like I said, I'm just so proud of how this community has come together to stand together on an issue that we all believe in. I am very greatly concerned about the negative impact this is going to have on our health, our safety, our quality of life, our schools, our hospitals. It's something that our voices need to be heard. And I think collectively, we're going to continue to work together, and we're going to try to achieve the results we want and that we deserve. So thank you again for standing up and being the voice that's so important in our community.
And to conclude, I'd like to turn it back over to Village President Jim Patterson for final comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Just a couple other people that I omitted early on. One of them is our Northfield Township trustee, Shiva Moshenzenda, right up front here. I'd like to mention a Lake Forest alderman, Ray Bushman, who's here and who we've met with, who helped facilitate. Our Glenview Village Board of Trustees, we have John Hinkamp, Debbie Carton, Kareem Koja, and Scott Britton. We're all here. And I'd like to thank you to Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky and Congressman Brad Schneider. Your help is going to be incredibly important, and for you to take the time to come here and speak to us, we really appreciate that, and we sincerely appreciate all of your efforts. Thank you. So just a couple more comments. None of this would have happened without 2 or 3 other groups here. One of them is the Action Committee over there, who has been so incredibly action-oriented. And I'd like to make a couple of comments here. The Illinois Department of Transportation has recently advised us that they will convene another public meeting to brief you on the revised environmental assessment, and there will be more opportunities for public input. So please look for the announcements of this meeting in the next few months. As a final reminder, the Glenview Action Committee has drafted a petition that you may sign in the lobby as you leave. You may drop off your comment sheet on the table in the lobby as you leave, or submit a comment on the website. And lastly, for more information and updates, you can go to the village website listed on the slide. Probably the most important person in the room is you. Each and every one of you. We need your voice, and you, too, by extension, get others involved. Every little bit of this is critical. To see this showing is a great, believe it or not, as they said when we were elected, a great first step. And so we really, if we're going to try to win this battle, you have to take some action yourself. You have to be active and just stay involved. Stay tuned into it and keep telling your friends and neighbors. This is one of the most powerful organizations in the government that we're working against. In the interest, if you think about it, you have commerce on one side and the interests of all of these residents on the other. So your voice is important, and we really and truly need your help, and we need you to stay involved. So thank you again for coming out tonight, and drive home safely. Please continue to work your way through this list of things to do. Thank you.